I'm going to start the recording now. Welcome everyone. So what we're going to be doing today is basically a day for us to kind of give you an overview of the grant cycle requirements. There have been some changes to our grant cycle and requirements this year. We will discuss those changes. We'll discuss what the contract terms and project budgets look like now and what they might look like after you've started this reporting process. So we'll go through budgets. We'll talk about, some of the instructions for reporting, tips, and then we'll talk about post-report audits. We do audit the reports afterwards, so we'll get into that. But before I begin, let me introduce myself. I don't know if I did that yet. My name is Rosalind Escobar. I'm the grants manager. I manage the organizational grant program. So I'm going to be basically leading this meeting, and we also have Ann Jensen on the line, our grants associate. Anne is going to be managing the chat, and so she will basically help me to make sure that I'm catching everybody's questions as we're going along. And I also will be we'll do the question and answer at the end. So if there's anything that you're like, oh, you know what, I didn't think of this until now, you will always have time at the end to go through any final questions. It's going to be about 35-40 minutes, maybe quicker. The year one reporting is actually a lot more simple than year two. So we're going to go through this pretty quickly. But like I said, feel free to ask any questions as we're going along, or you can chat them. And chat might be helpful because then everybody else can kind of see your question too. So here we go. Thank you, everyone. Let's get started. So before I even start, I think it would be helpful if you see on the screen, and I think we've shared this PDF with you all in the reminder email. If you haven't seen this, take a look at the reminder email we sent about this workshop. These links are important on this PDF. They are links to our reporting requirement information on our website. So on there, you'll see basically everything I'm saying right now. It's all in your Exhibit B document. It was part of your contract. So you have all of it in writing so that you can refer back to it. The one change is for year two organizations who received their Exhibit B document in their contract in 2019. Obviously, this year is going to be looked very different. So you might have noticed in your Exhibit B that the deadline for reporting was May 15th, which we've now changed to June 1st for everyone, year one and year two cohorts. So that's the main difference, but everything else is pretty much the same when it comes to kind of reporting requirements and processes. The other thing that's changed is, oh, you know what? I'm sorry, this is only year one. So year one, you're reporting out with the inside of the new grant management system. So hopefully you're all aware we've switched over from Fluid Review into SurveyMonkey Apply. It was the same platform that you used for submitting your original application. So you've seen that. Hopefully you've kind of gotten to know the system a little bit. So moving forward, SurveyMonkey Apply will be the system we'll be using for everything moving forward. If you do have anything in that old Fluid Review system, we suggest you visit that. You still have access to it. It's the same passwords. Visit and download any of your history that you might need, because by June, we will no longer have access to that system. So you want to make sure you have all your history from everything that you've submitted in the past. So in terms of grant overview, the grant timeline, as you know, it's a 2-year grant starting July 1. So the fiscal year goes by the county fiscal year, which is July 1 to June 30th. And this is a 2-year grant. So we awarded this particular grant for year one was awarded July 2020. You might have received the contract closer to August, but the contract is for any expenses, to cover any expenses between July 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2021 for year one. So any of your expenses that you've incurred will be part of this kind of reporting. And it's okay if you haven't expended that funding yet, as long as you've incurred that expense by June 30th. And we'll talk more in detail about the budgets in case you have more questions. So some of the new changes this year, major one, I think probably the biggest, is that we are now allowing organizations who are grantees to submit their invoice early on in the cycle. In prior years, we allowed you to provide a partial invoice. We do not have partial invoices as part of this process anymore. We've gotten rid of the partial invoices. It was always very confusing for everybody to figure out exactly how much to invoice for. So it's only one invoice per year now, and they're all due at the beginning of the cycle. So July, August is when you would submit that. So hopefully all of you have submitted your invoice for this first year. And if there's anybody that hasn't done that or is not sure, let us know. Feel free to email us if you have questions, but that's kind of the biggest changes. You're going to be receiving this funding up at the beginning of the cycle rather than at the end. So it's a little bit earlier in terms of the money when you're receiving it. And then we've changed the deadline so that you're not having to send us reports by May 15th. It's now June 1st. So you've got a little bit more time to submit those reporting documents. So year one grantees will be using the new SurveyMonkey Apply system. The link is down at the bottom of this page. Hopefully you can see it. And there are supplemental materials that we have now basically all the supplemental materials were reduced. All the requirements that you were required to give us for year one have been reduced, and I'll show you what they are now in just a second, in a couple more slides. And then the budgets, those have remained the same. So you still have to provide us with uh, kind of an explanation of how the funding was used in budget format. So you'll see that on the new grant management system. So two things to have before you begin this process. Number one, the copy of your contract and your adjusted grant budget. Those are the two things you had to submit in the beginning of the year. In the beginning of the fall of 2020, when we sent out your decisions, we asked you to both sign the contract and submit a new adjusted budget, because at the time of application, you probably were using an old projected set of numbers. And then when you finally got your answer about the grant and received your award amount, you were able to kind of figure out exactly how you were going to use that money. So refer back to that budget. And we know that this year has been a crazy year. It's been tough for everyone, and we totally expect that your budgets will not look the same, and that's totally fine. We will talk more about that, but know that the adjusted budget when you submitted that in the fall probably might look very different now that you're in May. So that's fine. So have the contract and the adjusted budget with you, and then the thank you letters for the Board of Supervisors. One of the requirements of the grant is that you have to write a thank you letter in year one and in year two of your grant cycle to the Board of Supervisors. The Board of Supervisors are the reason why we have this funding. So we always want to make sure that, number one, that we show appreciation to the Board of Supervisors, but also that they know who you all are, that they have a connection to you all. They want to know what's going on out there in their supervisorial district. So it's a good way for you to kind of connect with them, invite them to your events, and to kind of create a relationship with those supervisors. So if you haven't done it yet, you want to make sure you've got a thank you letter to the Board of Supervisors. You can do it to all five, or you can just create one for the supervisor in your district. And I see a question in the chat. Darren, yes, crazy is one way of putting it. Yeah, it's been tumultuous for sure. Okay, so that's kind of the checklist to get prepared before you even go into the system. So what you're going to be doing in the system, you're providing invoices if you haven't done it yet. If you've already submitted that invoice for year one, don't even worry about the invoice. It's already been hopefully paid out. If you haven't received payment, make sure you let us know and we can look into it. But hopefully you've all received that money already. And if you haven't submitted that invoice, submit it ASAP. The rest is basically the grant report forms, which are an annual requirement. And in that report, basically, you're just focused on letting us know some of the aspects of the project implementation for the year. What's happened, what you're thinking about for the following year, And, maybe if you have some updates or changes that you want to report out to us, maybe you're going to use year 2 funding in a different way. That's an opportunity. This reporting is an opportunity to let us know about that. And again, use Exhibit B. It's got all the details about, all this, the whole process kind of in writing so you can refer back. So the contract, this is really helpful just to see, number one, who did we have as a primary contact and a primary email address with, right? So refer back to your contract, because if you want to make sure, like, if you've had a primary contact change, that it's been updated with both our records and the records for the vendor relations for the county, because we don't share a database. So any changes have to be made both with us and with them. So look at your contract and see who was the primary contact there. And then you'll see on that contract on the first page that there is information about the grant purpose, which this year, another thing that we did was we changed. So everybody's purpose is general operating support this year. And the reason we did that is because we knew there might be some changes to the way that the project was going to be laid out as a result of the pandemic. And so we wanted to make sure everything was as flexible as possible for you all during this time. So luckily, our director allowed us to change this project scope to general operating support, meaning you have total flexibility to change the way that you're using the funding. You just have to let us know if it's a complete change, like, it's not even within the scope of what you were originally planning, or if it's just a modification, then you don't even have to change the scope. Maybe you just tell us in the report forms. This contract also has the amount of the grant, so that year 1 is you're receiving half of this amount. Maximum grant amount is for 2 years. So in year 1 you get half, and then in year 2 you get the second half. And so this is part of your contract. The second part is obviously the budget, which you probably actually fill this out in the old system, Fluid Review. And if that's the case, you'll need to go back into that system and download it. And if you don't have access to it, or you're just confused about how to do that, just email us. We have your budgets in our files, and we can just send it to you. So if you have any issues with finding your adjusted grant budget, just let us know. Email us at grants@arts.lacounty.gov, and we'll send it over to you. It's no problem. So like I said, there are very likely going to be modifications. This budget is really just kind of an outline of what you're thinking that you're going to do with the money. If you didn't end up doing that with this funding, that's fine. Just let us know. And then, before I go to the next, let me look at the chat. What is the email? It is grants, GRANTS, @arts, plural. So arts.lacounty.gov. Okay. And gov is with a V as in Victor, by the way. Okay. So the cash match. So you're aware every dollar of the grant that you received has to be matched with another dollar from a different source. Potentially that's earned revenue, that might be contributed. Probably a lot of this is going to be contributed revenue this year, I'm sure. So basically the reason we have that requirement is that we as the county want to make sure we're not providing more than 50% of the funding for the total cost of the project that is supported. And that's why we ask to make sure that you've had a cash match. And so in the report forms, you'll see there's a column where we ask you, where did that, not even where, we're not going to ask you where did that funding come from, we're going to ask you how you spent it. And I'll show you that budget in just a second, but that's basically the reason you see that column about what's the cash match expense. So to begin, you're going to go into the Fluid Review, the SurveyMonkey Apply system, as you are probably now very familiar. using that system moving forward. So you're going to go into that system. None of your history will be in there. It's going to be in Fluid Review. So you're starting from scratch, basically, if you haven't been in there yet into the SurveyMonkey Apply system. So once you're in there, you're going to see there are that you're going to need to log in, and you're going to use the same login information as the Fluid Review system. So if you don't have that kind of marked down somewhere in a file, or you just can't remember what was my password, or it's not working for you, whatever the email was that you think was associated with it, use that email and then click on Forgot Your Password, and it will send you a link to reset it. If you have no idea what that email was that you used to use, then we will probably need to change the account ownership. And that's a 3-step process that is a little bit more complicated, but you can contact us again at grants@arts.lacounty.gov, and we'll reset it and help you to get into the new system with the new account information. So just make sure you don't start a new account, because you've already gotten, everyone that was in Fluid Review was migrated into SurveyMonkey Apply. You do not need to start a new, and you don't have to register for a new account. You should have one in there existing already. But if you can't remember how to get in, let us know. Okay, so once you're in, you'll see there's a dashboard. And in the dashboard, there are forms that need to be filled out. So you'll see here on the screen, the 3 forms that are required for reporting is the narrative questions, the matching expenses. So it's year 1 final report narrative questions, year 1 report matching expenses, and year 1 supplemental materials. If you've already submitted the invoice, you will not see an invoice form in this list. However, if you haven't submitted the invoice, then you'll see an invoice form here. So, figure out, if you don't see an invoice, that's good. That means you've already hopefully received the money, and you're just providing us with the rest of the forms, the narrative, matching expenses, and supplemental materials. So to get in here again, you're going to start with the all applications list. Click on the OGP Manager Grant Round 1 grant that you see listed under OGP. Fill out the 3 tasks that are labeled as required. The ones that are labeled as optional are the change of information form. That's the form you would send us if, for example, you had a change of contact, like the person that was formerly in charge of the grant is no longer with you. You would use this form to let us know who the new person is, what the new contact information is, or let's say you have changed addresses. You would let us know with the change of information form. That's an optional form. Ignore it if there's no changes. The project amendment request is for folks who may have a change to their project. And when I'm talking about change, I'm talking about a major change, like you were originally going to fund somebody's salary, you're now going to use that for rent, the funding for rent, or you were going to use the funding for a series of workshops. Now you're going to use it to do an archival project. Those are the kinds of changes you would want to request an amendment with. If it's just a modification, for example, you were doing live workshops and now you're doing it all online, that's totally fine. That's a modification. You can just tell us what those changes were in the regular reporting forms in the narrative. We have an actual question asking you about that you'll see in a minute. So again, only if it's a huge change would you submit an amendment. If it's not a huge change, you're just reporting out with the regular forms. So you submit all of those documents. Let's look at the matching expenses budget. So like I was saying earlier, you'll see that there are 2 columns here. There's a column for OGP Year 1 grant expenditures, and then the Year 1 matching expenses. So basically what you're trying to do is make sure that the column on the left is more or equal to the column on the right, right? Because we want to make sure that there was, that the OGP was no more than 50% of the cost of the full project. And I know that's a really difficult, for some folks, that's a really difficult thing to kind of understand, but basically just make sure that left column is more or equal to the column on the right. And I do see a question in the chat. Since the funding changed to general operating, do we need to submit an amendment? Marissa, do you want to ask? Do you want to go and you want to clarify that question? Feel free to unmute yourself if that's helpful.
Hi. So the OGP was written for a specific project, but since all of our funding, since the OGP funding was switched to general operating support instead of the specific project, should we still submit an amendment?
Okay, so the general operating support, basically it's an umbrella term. We're still going to look at, so we're still looking at your project expenses and matching them to what you said you were going to do when you applied, right? So if there was a change to that original project scope, like basically what you said, what your description of your project was, if there was a change to that, like a major change, then you would submit an amendment.
Okay, so the specific project itself changed in that it went virtual instead of being in person, but the line item that we was the source of the funding, artist salaries, has remained the same.
Okay, it sounds to me like you don't need an amendment. It's a modification.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, and then I see another question. Let's see. Tony, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I'm a little late on this, but earlier in the meeting, you said that anyone who reserved a spot for this meeting we're having right now would receive a playback, but I didn't have to sign up. So I just want to make sure that, because the meeting ID was in the email body that I received, but I didn't have to sign up.
Yeah, so we have a list. Everybody that's logged into this Zoom meeting, we have
got it.
We have a list. Yeah, so don't worry if you didn't sign up through Eventbrite. We still have a list of everyone who's on this
okay,
line.
great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you for asking. All right, so let's move on. So hopefully that was clear. This matching expenses budget can be really confusing. So I want to make sure I give enough time in case anybody has additional questions about this. Basically, if your project changed from the original project, that's fine. Tell us how you spent the money out, both the grant money and the matching expenses money. This budget might be totally different than what you originally sent us with the application, and that's fine. We just want to see again, what is your new budget? Okay, and then along with those basically line items. Oh, sorry, let me go back because Edith says she'd like to hear it again about the match.
Yeah, you said that the OGP expense had to be greater than the match. I thought it was the other way around, or did I not hear correctly?
Equal to or greater. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm saying it backwards. I'm so sorry. The match, the column on the right, has to be greater or equal to the column on the left.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for asking that. That was so confusing. I'm confusing myself because this makes me nervous. Yes, matching expenses have to be more or equal to the budget for the grant, so that we're not spending more than 50% on the full cost of the project. Hopefully that makes it more clear. And thank you for that clarifying question. Okay, so what you'll see is there's a box under the budget that is a validation box. So this is going to catch any errors. So that's why you'll see it says meets or exceeds expectations. What are the expectations? That the column on the right is going to be a larger amount or equal to the column on the left. If it's not that way, it'll say false and it won't let you move on. So that's why if you may see a false there, that might be an error that you need to fix on the budget table. Provide a source of matching funds. So this can be kind of general, you know, it was donations, it was funding from a online gala that we did, an online event that we did. You can just kind of list them out. It'll just general information for us to kind of understand where the matching funds came from. And then on the last box, there's an other expenses field. This is so that you can clarify on the budget if you've clicked other and put an amount in that line item, that we know what is the other expenses. And so you can just clarify in that box, what are those? What is that information? Maybe you didn't click that G line item, then just skip that box. And you certify to make sure, to let us know that you are giving us correct information. So you say, yes, I certify that this information is correct. And then you click mark as complete. Always make sure to click mark as complete, so that you can move on to the next step and we're not missing anything. So always make sure to mark as complete. And then Edith is asking, do you want dollar amounts with the descriptions? If you have that, yeah, it's helpful if you just know in general, like 30% of this funding came from donations, 20% came from the event revenue. That's totally fine. We don't need to see the exact numbers. That's okay. If you have it, it's helpful, but if you don't, that's okay. Okay. So let's talk about these questions. There are 7 questions for you to answer in this narrative form. We've reduced that. It used to be, I think, 9 or 10. So we've tried to make it so that it's a little easier to get through this reporting form. That's our main kind of goal these next couple of years, is to look at our requirements, look at all the things that we're asking you for, and actually make sure that we are looking at it and that it's useful information for both you and for us. So wherever possible, we're kind of streamlining things. And one of the things that we did was streamline this narrative form. So what questions are being asked here? The brief description of the project. This is like maximum 200 characters. What did you originally say you were going to do with this funding? Maybe there's been changes, and so you can let us know that. But basically, this field is to let us know, what did you originally want to do with this project? What were the short and long-term goals when you wrote the application? And then now that you've kind of gone through the first year, what have been some of the outcomes that you're seeking to measure? Oh, sorry, what are the outcomes you are seeking to measure progress on in your project goals? And so that's a little bit bigger of a question, trying to figure out, like, what are your goals and how you're measuring the progress there. In the application, you are asked about internal and external steps taken toward integrating and reflecting the values of cultural equity and inclusion. This is a new question. You probably haven't seen this question in the report forms yet. I think this is the first year we've incorporated this question. So this is an opportunity for you all to kind of outline what those goals were in the project, what progress you've made. Maybe you haven't made much progress. Maybe it's been, maybe your project was completely derailed and you've spent most of the year trying to readjust or re-envision the project. So, just kind of tell us a little bit about that. What have been the successes and what have been some of the challenges? And then there's an optional question: what might have been the greatest success during the project so far and impacting your organization and our community? We've heard just verbally through phone calls from a lot of you about some successes, about organizations being able to impact even more folks because of the virtual format, being able to have a bigger reach, being able to have that time to rethink, to kind of close your doors and rethink how you're doing things, and have that moment of maybe reflection with your organization, staff, and board. What were those successes? If you have any and you want to list them, let us know what those were. That's an optional question. And then obviously we know there's been a lot of challenges this year. So tell us what that looked like for you. What did it look like for you to maybe have to go virtual? Maybe you had to close your doors and maybe you don't have a space anymore. We know some folks had to close their door and move and don't have a space. Let us know what those things are. We will be looking at these reports with a magnifying glass and really trying to make sure that we are providing you with the support and services you need to sustain and hopefully thrive and recover. So these reports are really important this year. I mean, it's always important for us to know how things are going, but especially this and next year, we're going to really be looking at these reports really closely. So let us know kind of what those challenges look like, and then what modifications you've made to try to cope, to recuperate, any modifications that you've made either to the project or the budget, and what it's going to be looking like for year 2, because maybe you've kind of gone through the first year, you had one plan, and now it's going to be different for year 2. Let us know if that's the case. Yeah, and that's kind of the narrative. That's what we're looking to find out a little bit more about. And I can pause here. If there's any questions, feel free to like take yourself off mute if you want to do that and go ahead and ask, or I can just read off the chat. I know I have one question from Stephen in Culver City. We probably will not spend all of our grant money. How do we handle that in budget reporting? So that's it's a question I've been asked by many people, and my answer is going to be pretty general, and it's just kind of to help you understand a little bit more about what this funding is even for. You have the option to change the way you originally were going to use the funding, and this year especially, we know that there will be major changes. And so when I say that, Stephen, I imagine that maybe your grant was to support performances that could not happen, which we all know most folks have had that issue with performing arts. So I would suggest having a conversation with your board members to see, is there a different way you could use the funding where you would actually spend the whole amount? We don't want to put you in a situation where you have to give money back to us because you couldn't meet those grant requirements. We want you to be able to use the funds in the way that you need to. So potentially you have folks that you've been working with that maybe haven't been paid. You may want to think about paying those folks and maybe use the funding in that way. So take a look at kind of what your project scope was, have a conversation with your board members, and if it looks like you may have an opportunity to use this funding in a different way, just let us know. And that might mean you have to submit an amendment form. You have time to do that. You have till June 1 to submit an amendment form and submit your reporting forms. But just know that we don't want you to have to give money back to us. We want you to be able to use the funding as you need to. And we know that there's a lot of unpaid expenses that go into arts programming. There always is. Everybody's always kind of working under difficult conditions. So use this funding as best as you can. And if that means, readjusting your budget, let us know. And maybe you use this funding in a different way than you originally planned. Kevin has another question. We've had to update and upgrade our website in order to accommodate online content. Can the expenses be used in that way? Yes, definitely. We expect that a lot of folks will be using this funding for things like that, upgrades to websites, paying maybe folks that are doing technical assistance to try to get things online. A lot of unforeseen types of, project expenses that you were not foreseeing. So yeah, definitely you can update your budget to show that you've had to go online and that has a cost. Any other questions? Okay. So the supplemental materials, this is now only one. It's only one thing that you have to submit with supplemental materials. It used to be 3. So we've removed the requirement for you to send us a copy of a brochure or a website page with our logo on it. You no longer have to submit that. You no longer have to submit artistic documentation for the first year. If you have it, great. If you don't, that's fine. We're not requiring it. We do have one requirement that's still on the list, and that's the thank you letter to the Board of Supervisors. And this year is so important for them to hear from you and hear about how you've adjusted, how you've retained your programming, how you've fared. They really need to make sure that they hear what's going on in the arts sector, and you're the link to them for them to hear about what's going on. So please make sure you send them that letter. And what you do is you send them that letter, and in the report form, you're just uploading a copy of that letter. And if you need instructions in terms of like what's the address, it's in the Exhibit B document online and in your contracting packet. And just a reminder that we have a new supervisor. Mark Ridley Thomas has been replaced by Holly J. Mitchell. So if you're in Supervisorial District 2, make sure you've addressed that letter to Supervisor Mitchell. All right. This is the invoice form. I won't spend too much time on this. You've all probably submitted this by now. I don't think there's very many organizations that haven't submitted the invoice, but if you haven't, you're submitting this with your general information, name, contact, address, vendor number, invoice amount, and then, and the invoice amount is going to be exactly half of your award, obviously. You certify and then you submit it. So once you've done all that, you've got all 3 of those documents complete. You'll see there's a green check mark on each of those in the dashboard. And then what you're going to do is submit it. I would suggest before you submit it, review. So click on the review button. By clicking on the review button, it'll take you to this menu where you have the ability to download what you are about to submit. So download it so that you have a copy and then submit your application with the green button. Okay, that's probably the best way to go so that you don't kind of lose track of what you've sent us or the things that you'll need, like the budget, to refer back to as you move forward with your project. Okay, so then just a quick minute on the auditing process. Each year what we do, we don't ask you to give us receipts with your reports. We got rid of that requirement. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago. We used to ask OGP 1 organizations to provide receipts, invoices, things like that. We no longer require that from OGP 1. However, we do now audit 10% of the applicants' reports. So of the 430 organizations that we support, we will probably audit about 40. And that would mean we'll go back to you and say, hey, we see that you have $40,000 in expenses. Can you please show us your copies of your canceled checks or your invoices or your receipts, contracts that show that you've spent this much money? And so what we want to make sure you're doing is, as you're going along and we're sending us reports, that you have some backup documentation that you're keeping in a file that you can go back to if for any reason you're one of the 10% of folks that are going to be audited, that you have that documentation somewhere and you can refer back to it and send us copies. And that's pretty much it for this webinar. Thank you for joining us. I'll take a minute because I know there might be some additional questions maybe we didn't cover. Again, we're going to send you this link, the link to this video, probably on Monday. So if you have any questions, you can ask them now. If you think of something over the weekend, you can email us or you can give us a call. But that's pretty much it. That's it for us. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Hopefully this was helpful. Oh, if we applied to other grants, will this grant be in SurveyMonkey? Yes. So you may have applied for the recovery funding or the Supervisorial District 2 funding. That's all in the SurveyMonkey Apply system. So yeah, you'll see each of those will be its own separate grant that you can choose in the new system, and you'll be able to find it. Basically, it's by name. You'll see which one it's which. Hopefully that's what you needed, what you were asking about, Janine, but feel free to unmute if that's not what you were asking.
No, that was exactly it. Thank you, Rosalind.
Thank you, Janine. Have a good one. All right, 2 more questions here that I'm seeing. What are the requirements for contractors' invoices? I didn't catch everything on the previous slide. Contractors' invoices, you can just show us what was the invoice amount. It doesn't have to be like the invoice copy that's paid out. It can just be what did they submit to you, and so that we can have that as backup documentation. And then Estelle is asking, in year 1 of 2020, you dispersed earlier due to COVID, correct? Yes, we dispersed funding early this year. It was around, I think, probably September that folks were submitting invoices and we were paying those out. So if you don't have record of having received that payment, let us know so we can follow up. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. And if you're a year 2 grantee, we're going to start that webinar in about 10 minutes. So feel free to stay on the line. And we will be starting in 10 minutes for year 2. Thanks, everyone. Good luck with the rest of your year. Thank you so much.
Yes, okay, here we go. So invoicing, reporting, terms and instructions. Invoices are due now at the beginning of the cycle rather than at the end. And so you might have submitted your invoice by this point, but just know that if you haven't and you are due to submit an invoice, that your invoice can include expenses all the way up to June 30 of 2021. And it's okay if you haven't spent that funding out, as long as it's been incurred by today, and it's been spent out by June 30th. So yeah, so for reporting purposes, just show us, how much funding has been spent out, and hopefully it wasn't less than the grant award amount. And we'll talk about that because we know there are some folks that may not have spent their full award amount yet. So there are some suggested ways to deal with that that we'll talk about. But your invoice should be for all expenses incurred up to June 30th. And if you haven't submitted invoice, make sure you do it ASAP, no later than June 1, because our fiscal year does end June 30th, and we need at least 15 days to close out our books. So really, our deadline is June 1, but we only have like 2 weeks to finish all of the processing of all of those payments. So make sure you submit that ASAP. So, and then the reports are an annual requirement, as you all know. You did this in year 1, and now you're doing it again year 2. Each year, the reporting focuses on some aspects of the grant implementation for the year that you're reporting on. So we know that this second year of projects will be different, and that you'll have had to make some significant shifts due to the crisis, the pandemic. And that's expected, and we know, and we've actually updated our questions to specifically ask you pointed questions about it, so that if there have been changes to the way you're using the funding, that we can, get that information from you, and only in cases where you have completely just like it's a whole different project would you need to submit an amendment. And if you want to check in with me about that, feel free to use my Calendly link. We can set up a time to talk about that. But basically, we know that there's going to be some big changes to the way projects are being supported and put together. Again, all of this information is in Exhibit B, so refer back to that if you need to. So take a look at your contract. This will be helpful. The contract that you submitted back in 2019 has information, number one, about who our contact is. So the main person that was kind of the primary contact on the grant will be listed on it. Your vendor number will be listed, which you'll need to refer back to this number and make sure it's all up to date. You want to make sure that your address is up to date so that if you've had an address change from the original time of contracting to now, that we have those changes submitted in our database, but also that those changes are submitted with vendor relations for LA County, because we don't share a database. So there's been changes made with one of us, make sure you do it, you also let vendor relations know. And the contract also has information about what the project scope was. So probably it'll give you like a little brief sentence that says it was to support events in the next 2 years, or to support someone's salary over the next 2 years. So take a look and refer back to that. If there's changes, like I said, that's fine. We can discuss kind of how to go forth if there have been changes. And then also the amount of funding. So obviously you receive your half of the full award amount in year one, and then the rest in year two. So refer back to this if you're not sure how much to invoice us for. This contract will have the exact full award for 2 years. Okay, and then I have a question. I will submit one invoice for the total ASAP. Okay, so somebody's saying they didn't submit an invoice yet. Yeah, so feel free to submit invoice ASAP so that we can process your payment ASAP. And if you want to do that by June 1, you can wait till June 1, as long as we have everything submitted in the system by June 1 and we can process it. If you want to do the invoice before the report, that's fine. You can like go into the submit the invoice now, and then we'll go in and then you can do the report later on after, you can do it by June 1, the rest of the reporting forms. So whatever works best for you. Okay, and so remember I was saying that you should refer back to the budget, and all this history is in Fluid Review. So refer back to the budget. And if you're not sure how to find all of the stuff that you've submitted, there's it's a little bit complicated, but it's a way to get your full history for the grant, everything that you've submitted, all attachments. If you go into your dashboard on Fluid Review and look at your logo on the right side in the dashboard, there's a button under that logo that says Download Application. What that's going to do is if you click that, it's going to give you a folder of every attachment, every form you've submitted during this cycle. So that's the whole history. And I suggest if anybody is missing or hasn't done that yet, or is missing some forms that they need to refer back to, go in and do that. Get all of that history, because after June, we won't have access to Fluid Review at all anymore, and we'll be missing all of that history if you haven't downloaded it. So make sure you get all your documents from out of Fluid Review so that you have that for your archive. We have a question from Georgia. Georgia, do you want to just unmute yourself?
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I can't go on video. I'm editing and it wouldn't work. Hi.
No.
Yeah, we have an employee that you actually know, Oksana, that used to work for us, and she no longer does. And we're not able to access the Fluid Review to do all of this. And we've tried to like recover the password, and it sends it to that email, so we can't get it. And I just wondered if you had any insight on what we might be able to do.
Yeah, there's a pretty easy fix to that. So what you want to do is send us an email to the grants@arts.lacounty.gov.
Yeah.
Or you can just, if you feel like you'd rather just check in with me, I'll send you my Calendly link. So basically, all we have to do is we need to change the ownership of that grant to you or whoever's going to be managing. And so that's the thing we do on the back end. We just need the email address for the new person that's going to be handling it so that we can change the ownership of the grant.
Oh, amazing. Okay, I'll email you. Perfect.
Okay, sounds good. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Georgia. No problem. Okay, so the budget is just free to refer back to, but like I said, your budget will probably not look maybe it doesn't look anything like this anymore. Maybe it does. Maybe you put everything online and you were able to pay out all those artists that you originally were planning to pay, or maybe you did that fundraiser gala event, but maybe it went online. If your line items look the same, that's great. If they don't, that's also fine. If you need, let me go back. If you need to amend your budget, like let's say it's completely different. You were planning to support somebody's salary and you ended up just using your funding to hire somebody to help you take everything online or go virtual, then let us know. Submit an amendment and then we'll approve your amendment, and then you can report out on the new project scope, and that's no problem. If it's just a slight modification, then you don't need to provide an amendment. If it's a slight modification, that's okay. You just tell us in the report. But if it's a completely different project, then let us know through the amendment form. And you'll see that amendment form in the dashboard of the grant management system. So in the OGP contract, you'll see there is a requirement that you have a cash match. And so basically the reason we have that cash match requirement is that as public funders, we want to make sure that we are not providing more than 50% of the full cost of the grant. And so we ask you to kind of help us understand where the funding went. So you'll see there's an expense budget where you would tell us what those numbers look like, and I'll show you in just a sec, but that's why you see there's a cash match. And it's just a reminder that for every dollar of the award, you have to have $1 or more to match to support the project. So accessing the reporting form. Again, you're going to do this in Fluid Review. This is the last time you'll be in Fluid Review doing this. Moving forward, you'll do everything to SurveyMonkey Apply. But until then, this year, go into Fluid Review. The URL for Fluid Review is www.lacountyarts.org/apply. It's the same passwords as before, so hopefully you have those passwords. If you have the issue that like Georgia had where the person that was managing the grant is no longer with you, let us know and we'll change the ownership of the account. We recommend submitting this by at least 5 days prior to the deadline if you can. It helps just because the system gets overloaded and can be really glitchy if there's a lot of folks in there all at the same time. So, give yourself time to submit it. And like I said, if you have any issues, feel free to email us grants@arts.lacounty.gov. And so once you're in, you've logged in, you'll see the dashboard the kind of welcome page is where you'll see all the grants that you've applied to. So you'll see if you've got an internship grant, you'll see an internship grant application there. You'll see an organizational grant program grant. So the one that you'll click on obviously is the OGP Manager Grant Round 2 Invoice and Reporting Round. You would click on either the name of your organization in the blue font, or you can click on Edit. I think it's Edit or Start. It might be Start actually to start your process. So you click on there and that will take you to all the forms that need to be submitted. So you'll see on that list, there are 3 forms. If you have not submitted your invoice, you'll see 4 forms. So most of you will see 3 forms: the final report narrative questions form, the final report matching expenses form, and the supplemental materials form. To start those, you click Start, and you don't have to do this all at the same time. You may want to save and come back to it. That's totally fine. As you're going through it, save everything, mark it, and make sure that you save. And then to come back, you can just click Edit. This Start would become an Edit button. and you would just click edit. So yeah, so make sure you do that and that you're saving as you're going along. And so this is the first thing that you'll probably see if you're going in order, is the matching expenses budget. You'll see there's 2 columns on this budget table. Number 1 column on the left is OGP expenditures. This is how you'll give us information about the line items for the award funding, how you spent out the award funding. And so you'll put that amount in, and you'll put in the matching expenses. And what you want to make sure is that the matching expenses total is at least equal to, or maybe it's more than, the OGP expenditures. So basically, column on the right should be equal to or more than column on the left. There is a validation box that will show you whether or not the figures you have in there actually are meeting the validation. So it's basically like if you don't have, if you're not meeting those expectations or those minimum requirements, this validation box won't let you move forward until you fix your numbers. So it's there to help you. It's there to make sure your numbers are accurate. It can be a little confusing though, because you'll see a true or false, and you're not doing anything, you're not typing into that. It's just to know, whether or not you have correct numbers, or your totals are matching the requirements that we have. So your, matching expenses equal to or more than OGP expenses. I see a couple of questions. Do you need to save each page? Yeah, I would suggest you save as often as possible, just to be safe. Even if you think it's going to be fine, just click save. It couldn't hurt. We've seen glitchy stuff happen on the system, so we don't want you to lose your work. June 1 narrative questions already have my last report in there. That's odd. Lisa, I would take a look and see. I don't know if it's auto-filling or if maybe you started filling that in, and maybe it's your like a historical. That's an odd one.
It looks
Lisa,
like yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
Hi. It looks like what's in there is the end of last year's report, or yeah, because it talks about pandemic and what we were planning to adjust for the next year and all that stuff. Oh,
I wonder if, sometimes these forms are set up so that you don't have to repeat information.
Okay.
And that might have been the case here. Maybe it was an autofill from last year. You should be able to delete if you need to delete. I think that might have been what happened. I feel like maybe, I can't tell you for sure, but I feel like sometimes what we've done is to help folks get through this stuff quicker. We just kind of autofill because we know sometimes a lot of the projects are the same, and you may just have some, some adjustments to make.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, feel free to update it and resave it.
Okay. Thanks.
And then if there's anything else glitchy like that you're like, I actually feel like I might want to check in with you and go into the system, then just let me know.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you for flagging that for me. That's kind of strange.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, yeah, so the budget, you'll then at the bottom put in your sources. So what are your sources? Did you have maybe donations that were submitted, or maybe the board members made contributions? Maybe you had an event where you were able to make some earned revenue. Just let us know what those matching funds, what those sources look like. It doesn't have to be a dollar for dollar, like exactly this much money was from this. Just a general kind of outline of where the matching funds came from is helpful. And so here are the narrative questions. And so before I go even into this, I just want to make sure to kind of give you just kind of an understanding of why we ask this information, because I know it's a lot to think about, it's a lot to deal with, and it can be a hassle. So, this year in particular, I feel like we are really going to be looking at these responses very closely. Every year the research and evaluation team and us as the grants and professional development team, we look at these responses. We share data with each other. We look at trends. We try to highlight successes and challenges and kind of general shifts in the nonprofit sector to kind of be a better partner and a better supporter, more responsive to the needs of this field. And in particular this year, where we know that it was a tumultuous year, there's been constant change. We want to see, what have your responses been? How have you adjusted what you're doing? What are the needs that are not being addressed yet? We know that there was recovery funding, but how have you really been able to face these challenges? What successes have you found? What progress have you made? In particular, on the cultural equity and inclusion initiative, you've got those new questions about what you're doing in terms of aligning yourself with our vision of a more equal arts landscape. What are those successes that you've made or that you've achieved? So we'll really be looking at these responses with a real close eye and doing an analysis. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do, is just really be responsive. And so we did reduce the number of questions to make it easier. So it used to be, I think, 10. I believe it was like 10, and it's now maybe, I can't remember, but now it's 7 narrative questions. And then you've got some questions that are like yes and no, or checkbox marked questions that you'll see in just a second. So let's talk about the narrative. Number 1 is the program goals. So what did you originally intend to use the funding on, and what does that look like now? So what is the funded project? What are you doing? And how have you made adjustments? So that's a maximum of 200 characters. Then we ask about progress and success. So what short and long-term goals are you working on with this project? Maybe you were supporting initiatives using this funding. How did you do, what accomplishments did you complete with the funding? What progress did you make towards those goals? If you have qualitative or quantitative data that you want to share, that's great. We want to know about any successes. Maybe what's your greatest success during this project in impacting your organization or community? We know that for many folks, success looked like you basically not shutting your doors and learning how to put things online, or learning how to put your programming to go virtual, or using social media in different ways. Maybe it's reaching more folks in areas that geographically were not close to you, because now that you're virtual, you have a wider, broader scope of outreach. Tell us what that looked like. So that's kind of project progress and success. Project challenges. Obviously, everyone's going to have something to list under these questions, and we just want to know kind of what that looked like for you. How did you grapple with this tumultuous last year of the grant cycle? What could have helped you? In addition to funding, obviously, everyone always, there's always going to be a need for funding, but what else could be helpful in terms of, from public funding? How could we be more supportive and be more intentional in the way that we provide support and respond to the needs? And then in terms of your statement, policy, and plan that you provided with your application, we're now asking, what progress has been made, what changes in your process has been incorporated that you might have listed under your application. So you might need to look back at your application to see, what did we intend to do around cultural equity and inclusion? What did our statement, policy, or plan say? And how have we made some progress? So you'll have the space to do that and to really get into that. We have a question here. Let's see. Regarding the data, we had to push all our spring programs to May to record, and broadcast won't occur until June. We won't have audience data for these programs for this report. That's okay. You can project out based on maybe some of your history. If you don't know exactly how many folks will be attending, but maybe you have like a projected number, like maybe you're expecting it's going to be 300 to 500. You can give us a range, that's fine. And we ask for zip codes. So you may not have zip codes for this most recent year because probably the zip codes it's all been virtual programming. But if you have zip codes for anything that happened during the 2019-2020 year, then that's useful and we can use that. Hopefully that answers your question, Lisa. Okay. So yeah, and then we have those questions about your project and participants reach, right? So if you did, a series of free programs, or maybe all of your programming was free this past year, tell us, more or less how many folks were in attendance. It can be a range if you have that data. If you don't, that's fine. Total attendance in classes or workshops, both paid and unpaid, if you have the data. Projected is fine. Number of paid staff, you'll probably know. Number of paid artist partners, I'm sure you know. Number of volunteers, hopefully you have an idea. And then, these are the demographic questions. And so if you are not able to answer these questions in terms of the 2020-21 year, use the 2019-2020 data. We can use that. So hopefully you have some idea of like the demographic information of the folks that you've served through, arts education at schools or workshops that you've done on location or on site from prior to the pandemic. Anything that you have that we can use is helpful. So make sure you kind of can mark these boxes as well as you can. These are not numbers, these are just check boxes. So you would just be checking demographic data about audiences that you've served. Yeah, and then there's a supplemental materials question. So this is the third form where you provide those extra kind of documents, attachments. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me make sure I answer the questions that I'm seeing in the chat. Do you have do you have to specify that you're using 2019 data? It's helpful, I think, but I don't know if there's a question generally that says what year is this from. Actually, no. You know what? If you don't have data for 2020, I think most folks will not have much data for 2020, and that's okay. Just put in whatever you have. You don't have to tell us exactly what year it's from. We just want to know more or less for the cycle, what communities you've served, if you have that. I'm sorry, I think you already went over this, but once more for us in the back, how can we access our year one report on fluid review in case we need to pull some of our last year statistics? Hi, Shweta. Yeah, you're going to do everything through fluid review. So you should hopefully have your username and password that you probably created when you applied for the grant back in 2019. If you have no idea what that username and password is, let us know. If you know what the username is, then go in, put the username in and say that you forgot the password. It'll send you a link to reset it. And then once you're in the fluid review site, you'll see the dashboard, you'll see the OGP grant listed, and you'll see all the forms that need to be filled out. And then Lisa is asking, if you serve a general audience, should you check every box or are they specific? For example, if you presented a program in a particular facility. Okay, so I think what's helpful, Lisa, is if you're putting on shows or events in like a different place where maybe you can find data, like I think that's helpful. So for example, like if you're an arts educator and you work at a specific school in a specific neighborhood, you might be able to get some data about that neighborhood from census data, from going on to the census information. So if you can do that, that's helpful. You may even have some zip codes from maybe putting things on Eventbrite and having people register. That's helpful. You can get data that way. from just zip codes. For programming in a prison, I don't know if you would be able to maybe ask whoever was organizing that event in partnership with you. They may have some data that they could provide for you. It's not hard numbers. It's really just, the general questions about demographics. So if they can provide you with some of that data, that's helpful. If you don't know and you have no way of finding out, then yeah, just say general audience, and you may not have demographic data for that. As attendance for virtual programs, can I report live viewers, or do we report total viewers since we put all recording online? I think live viewers is more helpful because we just don't know how many. It's hard to provide anything concrete about total viewership because obviously that's, you're going to have folks looking at it way into the future, so you won't be able to kind of have hard data based on total viewership. So anything that you did that was live and that you might have data for is helpful. And I think through Zoom you can gather some information, but it just depends on how you're collecting that data. Hopefully that was helpful. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped over supplemental materials. So you have the copy of the letter of impact for the Board of Supervisors, proof that you put our logo on either something on the web or something like a brochure or marketing materials. So you would want to provide proof of that, copy of or images of an event that might have happened. And if you don't have something from a live event, maybe you put in a screenshot of something that was online. Even if it's like a screenshot of a meeting that happened or a workshop that happened, having a screenshot is really great. It's totally fun to do that. And then the zip code list, as we just talked about, you would want to make sure you have zip codes for locations. And if you don't have locations for 2020, 2021, use the ones from year prior, 2019 to 2020. And then the invoice form, you've seen this. Most of you have already filled this out. You won't have access to this form if you've already filled it out. So this is only for the folks that still haven't done it. In the invoice form, you will be asked about your organization's legal name, your address, the vendor number. Make sure you have that vendor number from the contract. If there's been a change, make sure you report that change. The invoice information has to match what's in vendor records. So if you submit an invoice to us and the address on the invoice is different than what vendor relations has on file, they will not pay it out. They will reject it and have us go back to you for clarity. So just make sure if you've had any changes, you've reported that to vendor relations, updated that website, web page, and then let us know you've updated it with us, and then you can submit invoice. So you would save and exit, and then once you've saved and exited, you'll see everything marked as complete. Hopefully, if you've been saving and exiting, everything that you've been required to complete will say complete. And then you'll have the option to submit the final report. Please make sure you click submit final report, because until you do that, we won't know that it's been completed. So this is kind of the button. It triggers us to know, go into the system and look at this report. It's done. Okay, and then we have our audit every year. It's basically 10% of our organizations will be audited. So basically 40 of the 430 organizations we support. What that means is we'll come back to you and ask you for proof of expenses. So things like receipts or reports from QuickBooks or any accounting software that you're using that shows that you've expended the amount that you're saying that you've expended in the budgets on the report. So, invoices are fine. So if you have an invoice from a contractor that's been submitted, you can submit that. Receipts, statements. Just make sure you highlight things so that we can find it pretty easily and do the math and make sure that the math calculates out. Okay, and let's see what else. I think that's it for the general information. I'm going to put my Calendly link in the chat in case you want to chat with me later, or not chat with me, but connect with me over the phone. so that you have access to my Calendly account. And otherwise, I can take some questions now if there's anything still pending or that you're still curious or want a little bit more clarity about. All right, thank you, everyone. Hopefully this year will be better, you know, as we get closer to the summer. Thank you for all you do. We will share this video out, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you so much.